Beneath the pale light of dawn, as the mists still cling to the mountain ridges of northern China, a colossal structure stretches into the horizon. It winds like a sleeping dragon, vanishing into valleys, reappearing on ridgelines, and threading its way through deserts where the earth itself seems scorched by time. This is the Great Wall of China, one of the most iconic works of human engineering, a monument so vast that it defies imagination. And yet, when we look closer, it is more than just stone, brick, and earth. It is a story of fear and ambition, of kings and emperors, of ordinary peasants whose sweat and blood were poured into its foundations. Tonight, we set out not to admire legends, but to uncover the truth. Because the story of the Great Wall, as with so many great monuments, is far more complex than the myths would have us believe. The mystery of the wall. To many, the wall is thought of as a single, continuous ribbon of stone, unbroken across thousands of miles, visible even from space. But the truth is subtler, and in its own way, more fascinating. The Great Wall is not one wall, but many walls built over centuries, by different dynasties for different reasons. Some stretches lie in ruins reclaimed by earth and grass. Others, like the proud Ming fortifications near Beijing, rise tall and defiant, restored for modern eyes. And yet, no matter its state, the wall tells us something profound about the people who built it, their fears of invasion, their dreams of empire, and their determination to control the frontier between order and chaos. Why build such a wall? The idea of defending one's borders is as old as civilization itself. But China, with its fertile heartlands bordered by harsh steppes, deserts, and mountains, lived in a constant state of tension with the nomadic peoples beyond. For centuries, waves of mounted warriors, swift, elusive, and devastating, swept across the northern plains, threatening towns and trade. The wall was never simply a line of defense. It was also a statement, a declaration of where civilization ended and where the wilderness began. Imagine standing atop a watchtower 2,000 years ago. The wind is biting, the land below stretches wide and empty. Somewhere beyond the horizon, horsemen might gather. Lighting a signal fire could summon reinforcements miles away. Carried tower to tower by smoke, the wall was not just stone. It was an intricate network of communication and vigilance. The cost of the wall, but grandeur came at a terrible price. The labor force that raised the earliest walls was not composed of skilled artisans alone, but of conscripted peasants, soldiers and convicts pressed into service. The terrain was harsh, the winters brutal. Many thousands perished in the building of walls that were destined, sooner or later, to crumble. Ancient tales recall bones and bodies buried within the wall itself. One legend, that of Meng Jianmu, tells of a woman whose husband was taken to work on the wall, never to return. When she searched for him, she discovered he had died there, and in her grief, her tears caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing his remains. Myth or not, the story preserves a truth. For every stone that stands, countless lives were lost, a symbol of strength and weakness. The paradox of the Great Wall lies in what it represents. On one hand, it is the ultimate symbol of strength, a monumental line drawn against the chaos of invasion. On the other, it reveals vulnerability. A truly confident empire does not need to wall itself off. And indeed, for all its size, the wall did not always succeed. Enemies found ways around it, or through it, or even bribed their way past its gates. Yet the wall endured. It endured because it was more than defense. It was a psychological barrier, reinforcing the idea of a secure and ordered China, separated from the wild and shifting world beyond. The journey ahead. In this documentary, we will travel across centuries. We will see how the wall began not as one, but as many small regional defenses in the age of warring states. We will follow Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, whose dream of unity forged not only a nation, but the first great version of this wall. We will march with Han soldiers guarding caravans of silk, their watchtowers standing against the nomads of the north. We will witness the rise and fall of dynasties that neglected the wall, only to see it reborn on a grander scale under the Ming, whose mighty fortifications still dominate the mountains today. And finally, we will reflect on the wall as it came to be seen not only as a military structure, but as a global symbol of China's greatness, its struggles and its endurance. Closing of the introduction. The Great Wall of China is not a simple story of bricks laid upon one another. It is a tapestry of history, woven from ambition, suffering, ingenuity, and myth. It is the story of an idea that boundaries can be made permanent, that order can stand against chaos, and that a wall can hold back the tides of history. As we begin this journey together,
I invite you to slow down, listen,
and picture the wall not as a distant monument, but as a living story. A story that speaks across time, whispering the voices of emperors and peasants, soldiers and travelers, all bound together by stone, earth and the endless sky. If we are to understand the Great Wall of China, we must first step back into a time when the wall did not yet exist. A time before the first emperor, before the unification of the warring states, when China was still an idea more than a reality. The seeds of the wall lie deep in this age of division, fear, and ambition, a land of many kingdoms. China's earliest history was not of a single empire, but of dozens of small, often competing states. By the first millennium BCE, what we think of as ancient China was already fractured. The Zhou dynasty, nominal rulers, had lost much of their real power, and the land was carved into semi-independent principalities. This was the Spring and Autumn period, 3406 BC, a time of shifting alliances, rival warlords and constant conflict. Borders were fluid. Armies clashed not only for land, but for prestige. Cities fortified themselves with moats and walls of tamped earth, and rulers built barriers to keep out rivals. Yet these early fortifications were not yet the Great Wall. They were local, temporary and defensive on a much smaller scale. Still, the idea was planted. Walls could protect, walls could define, and walls could proclaim the strength of a ruler. Geography and the steppe frontier. China's geography shaped its destiny. To the south lay forests and rivers. To the east, the sea. But to the north and west stretched a very different world. Open grasslands and deserts. Home to swift, mobile nomadic tribes, where the Chinese relied on agriculture. Millet and wheat in the north, rice in the south. The nomads lived from herds of horses, sheep, and cattle. This contrast produced an unending tension. Agricultural societies need stability, fields, and villages. Nomadic societies thrive on movement, raiding, and adaptation. As early as the Zhou dynasty, northern tribes launched raids into Chinese farmland, devastating crops and threatening towns. In response, the first frontier defenses appeared. Ditches, watch posts, and embankments. These were the ancestors of what would become the Great Wall. The warring states and the birth of defensive walls. By the 5th century BCE, China entered the Warring States period. 475 to 21 BCE. 7 great powers, Qin, Chu, Zhao, Wei, Han, Yun, and Qi vied for supremacy. It was a time of both great suffering and astonishing innovation. Philosophy flourished. Confucius, Mencius, Laozi, and the legalists shaped Chinese thought. At the same time, warfare became ever more sophisticated, with iron weapons, crossbows, and mass armies. Amid this chaos, rulers turned increasingly to fortifications. The state of Qi in today's Shandong province constructed one of the earliest known long walls in the 5th century BCE. The state of Zhao, threatened by nomadic horsemen, built defensive lines across its northern frontier. Wei, Han, and Yan followed, each building walls of tamped earth, stretching for dozens or even hundreds of kilometers. These were not yet the Great Wall of China, but when seen together, they were its foundation. They reveal that the idea of a barrier against the north was not the dream of a single emperor, but a response shared by many states, each seeking to survive in a violent and uncertain world. Walls as symbols of power. Walls served a practical function. They slowed enemies, channeled raids, and gave defenders an advantage. But they also carried deep symbolic weight. To build a wall was to say, "This is my land, and here it shall end." It was a statement to subjects and rivals alike that a ruler had the resources, manpower, and will to shape the landscape itself. The philosopher Bai Xunzi, writing in the 3rd century BCE, criticized this obsession with fortifications, warning that true strength lay not in walls, but in just governance. Yet kings continued to build because walls projected authority, even if they could be breached. Their very existence was a reminder of who ruled the land within, the human cost. Even in this early stage, the building of walls came at immense human expense. Most were made of rammed earth, created by pounding layers of soil between wooden frames until it hardened. The work was grueling and required thousands of laborers, unlike palaces or temples which celebrated life and ritual. Walls were born of fear and urgency. For peasants conscripted to the task, a wall meant backbreaking toil far from their homes. For rulers, however, it was an investment in survival. And as we will see in later centuries, the pattern never changed. Walls were always built on the backs of the powerless, to serve the ambitions of the powerful. The idea of boundaries, beyond the physical, there was also the mental boundary. The sense that within the walls lay civilization, and beyond them something other. Early Chinese texts often described the northern tribes as unruly, dangerous or barbaric, not in the sense of lesser people, but in the sense of outsiders, ungoverned by the rights and order of Chinese life. Thus, walls were not just military structures. They were cultural statements. They drew a line between us and them, between the settled world of agriculture, ritual, and cities, and the unpredictable world of the steppe. The Great Wall would eventually embody this division on a colossal scale, setting the stage for Qin. By the late 3rd century BCE, the warring states had exhausted themselves. Out of this storm rose the state of Qin, hardened on the western frontier, disciplined by legalist philosophy, and determined to unify China under one rule. Qin armies swept across the land, defeating rival states one by one. When the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, declared the birth of a unified empire in 221 BCE, he inherited not only their lands but also their walls, and with the ambition that defined his reign, he sought to connect them, expand them, and forge something new. The first version of what we now call the Great Wall of China. The year is 221 BCE. After centuries of war and division, the warring states of China have fallen one by one before the armies of Qin. For the first time in history, a single man rules them all. Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. His vision is vast, his will unyielding. He believes he has founded not merely a dynasty, but an eternal empire. And with his rise begins the story of the Great Wall as a national project. Qin Shi Huang, the dream of unity. To understand why the first emperor turned to walls, we must understand his character. Qin Shi Huang was ruthless, suspicious, and utterly determined to stamp out disorder. His empire stretched farther than any before, but it was still fragile. Newly conquered lands needed to be bound together by roads, by laws, by force, and by the visible presence of imperial power. He ordered a single script for writing, a standardized system of weights and measures, even a uniform width for wagon axles, so that roads would serve the empire seamlessly. For him, walls were not simply defensive structures. They were part of a grander scheme to unify, control, and impose order. The northern threat, the greatest danger to Qin, lay not in the beaten Chinese states, but in the north. Across the open grasslands roamed the Xiongnu, fierce horsemen who could strike swiftly and vanish just as quickly. To the settled farmers of China, the steppe tribes were a constant terror, raiding fields, capturing livestock, and undermining the fragile security of the frontier. The states Qin had conquered already possessed their own defensive walls, but these walls ended abruptly at old borders, broken and scattered. The first emperor's solution was to link them, to weld them into a single, immense frontier defense, a barrier not between Chinese states, but between the empire and the nomadic world beyond, building the first Great Wall. The task was immense. From the Ordos region in the west to the mountains of Liaodong in the east, scattered walls of packed earth were extended, repaired, and connected. The construction followed natural features, mountain ridges, river valleys, and deserts. Unlike the familiar Ming walls of brick and stone, the Qin wall was made of rammed earth. Layers of soil compacted between wooden frames until it hardened like rock. It was cheaper, faster, and easier to build on such a scale. But it required a colossal labor force. The laborers who built this first Great Wall, not skilled artisans alone, but the common people, soldiers sent from the armies, peasants conscripted from the fields, and convicts sentenced to years of toil. Ancient chronicles describe the misery of the workers. They marched great distances to reach remote sites, often with little food or shelter. The winters of the north could be bitter, the summers scorching. Sickness and exhaustion claimed countless lives. Some say that for every yard of earth raised, a life was lost. It is no wonder, then, that legends soon attach themselves to this first wall, the story of Meng Jiangnu, whose tears collapsed the wall and revealed her dead husband's body, belongs to this era, a reminder that behind the grandeur of the wall lies human suffering. The first wall's purpose, the Qin wall, was not invincible. Horsemen could still find ways around it, and its sheer length made permanent defense impossible. But its purpose was not only to block, it was to channel. By fortifying key passes and ridges, the wall funneled nomadic raiders into specific routes, where Qin soldiers could wait in ambush. Watchtowers and beacons allowed signals to travel quickly across the frontier, warning of incursions. More than this, the wall was psychological. It marked in earth and labor the boundary of the empire. For the first emperor, it was a statement to the world. China is united, and its northern frontier is guarded. The great vision, the harsh rule. The building of the wall was just one part of Qin Shi Huang's larger vision. He ordered colossal palaces, vast road networks, and perhaps most famously, his own tomb guarded by the terracotta army. His rule was harsh, based on legalist philosophy, with strict laws and brutal punishments. The wall, then, was the perfect reflection of his reign. Monumental, authoritarian, costly in lives, but unforgettable in scale. The fall of Qin. Yet even as the wall rose, cracks appeared in the empire. Qin Shi Huang's rule was feared but not loved. His death in 210 BCE unleashed turmoil. Rebellions erupted, and within a few years the dynasty collapsed. The Qin had lasted barely 15 years, a blink in the long story of China. So what became of the wall? In the chaos, much of it fell into neglect. Without constant upkeep, rammed earth erodes quickly. And yet the idea had taken root. The notion of a northern frontier defined by walls would not die. Later dynasties would rebuild, extend, and reimagine the wall, each in their own way, for their own time. Legacy of the first emperor's wall. Though little of the Qin wall survives today, its legacy is immense. It was the first attempt to create a continuous frontier barrier, stretching across the vast northern landscape. It transformed the scattered walls of rival kingdoms into a single imperial project, and it fixed forever in the Chinese imagination the idea that the north was to be held back by walls, and that China itself could be defined in stone and earth. The wall of Qin Shi Huang was not the same as the mighty brick ramparts tourists climb today, but it was their ancestor. It was the first dragon spine across the mountains. When the Qin dynasty fell in flames, many believed its grand projects, its palaces, its laws, and yes, its walls would crumble into dust. But out of that chaos rose another dynasty, one destined to last centuries and leave an even deeper mark on history than Yuendo. If the Qin had built walls to unify and protect, the Han would give the wall a new and unexpected role to guard not only fields and villages, but a vast artery of trade and culture. A route that would become legendary, the Silk Road, the rise of the Han. In 2106 BCE, a man named Liu Bangzhi, once a peasant, rose to power after the fall of the Qin. He declared himself Emperor Gaozu, founder of the Han dynasty. Unlike the harsh Qin rulers, the Han struck a more balanced tone, firm but tempered with Confucian ideals of governance, less reliant on terror, more focused on stability. Yet the problem of the northern frontier remained. The Xiongnu, those fierce riders of the steppe, had not vanished. If anything, they had grown stronger, united under charismatic leaders who raided deep into Chinese lands. Gaozu himself suffered humiliating defeats at their hands. Thus, the Han emperors looked again to the wall, not only as a shield, but as a framework for controlling the frontier, expanding the wall. The Han did not merely repair Qin's wall, they expanded it over the centuries of their rule. Walls extended westward into the deserts of Gansu, where the arid landscape offered both challenges and opportunities. These western stretches were less about keeping out nomads and more about protecting the flow of goods. For here lay the birth of international trade. The Han constructed the watchtowers, beacon systems, and garrisons. They stationed soldiers along the wall, not only to fight but to farm. Military colonies were established, producing grain to feed both troops and traders. This transformed the wall into a living frontier, lined with settlements where military and civilian life intertwined. The Silk Road and the Wall, the Han's most enduring legacy, was their opening to the wider world. Chinese silk, soft, light, and shimmering, was coveted far beyond the empire. Merchants began to carry it westward, across deserts and mountains, toward Central Asia and eventually all the way to Rome. In return came horses, precious stones, glassware, and new ideas. But such trade routes were perilous. Bandits, nomads, and rival states threatened merchants. The wall, extended deep into the deserts, became a protective spine for these caravans. Fortresses like Ayuman Pass, Jade Gate Pass, and Yang Pass became gateways of commerce and culture. To pass through them was to step from the heart of China to the vast unknown of Central Asia. The wall in this era was no longer merely defensive. It was economic. It safeguarded the lifeblood of the empire's prosperity, diplomacy, and the Xiongnu. Of course, walls alone could not stop the Xiongnu. At times, the Han pursued diplomacy. They sent princesses in marriage alliances, along with lavish gifts of silk and grain, in hopes of buying peace. At other times, Han emperors waged great campaigns into the steppe, seeking to break the nomads' power. The wall was the constant in this ebb and flow, a line to fall back on, a reminder of where China ended and danger began. Life along the wall. What was it like to live on the Han frontier? For the soldiers stationed in lonely garrisons, life was harsh. Winters bit deep, summers burned, and supplies were scarce. Yet these men became both warriors and farmers, tilling land by day and standing watch by night. The wall was alive with communication. Beacon towers dotted its length, where fires or smoke could carry a warning hundreds of miles in hours. One spark at the far end of the wall might set off a chain reaction of signals, summoning armies across the empire. And yet amid this military purpose, life found its way. Traders mingled with soldiers, settlers married locals, cultures blended. Artifacts discovered near Han Wall. Ruins reveal a surprising cosmopolitanism. Roman glass, Persian silver, Indian spices. The wall was not just a barrier, it was a bridge, a wall of earth and time. The Han Wall, like its Qin predecessor, was built largely of rammed earth in the deserts of Gansu and Ningxia. Layers of earth and reeds hardened under the sun. For centuries, these walls endured, their lines still visible today, stretching across barren landscapes where no brick has ever been laid. It is astonishing to imagine standing in those silent deserts, seeing the faint remains of Han walls. One realizes that even 2,000 years ago, emperors dared to draw lines across emptiness, shaping the frontier with human hands. The decline of Han power. As centuries passed, the Han grew strained. Internal corruption, rebellion, and pressure from nomadic powers eroded its strength. The empire fractured in the 3rd century CE, and the wall, like the empire, suffered neglect. Yet its role during the Han dynasty left a permanent mark. It had proven that the wall could be more than a fortification. It could be a corridor of trade, a protector of prosperity, and a stage for cultural exchange. The Silk Road flourished because the wall anchored it. The Han dynasty had given the wall a new purpose to guard not only against raiders, but also to anchor the Silk Road, securing the lifeblood of trade and prosperity. But history does not stand still. Dynasties rise, dynasties fall. Each left its mark on the wall, and in many eras, the wall seemed to mirror the strength or weakness of the empire itself. The Sui dynasty, brief renewal. After centuries of turmoil following the fall of the Han, China was once again united under the Sui dynasties in 581. The Sui emperors, though short-lived, were ambitious builders. They restored sections of the wall to defend against the Turks of the northern steppe, yet their reign burned brightly and briefly. By 618 CE, the dynasty had collapsed, leaving little lasting imprint on the frontier. Still, the pattern was clear. When China felt threatened from the north, it turned to the wall. The Tang dynasty, power without walls. The Tang dynasty of 68907 CE is remembered as one of China's golden ages, a time of poetry, cosmopolitan culture, and immense power. At its height, Tang influence extended far into Central Asia. And yet, strikingly, the Tang did not heavily rely on the wall. Why? Because the Tang were strong. Their cavalry was formidable, their diplomacy skillful. They secured the Silk Road not by hiding behind barriers, but by projecting power outward. For the Tang, walls seemed unnecessary, even limiting. Instead, their focus was on alliances, trade, and the flourishing of Chang'an, the great capital where traders, poets, and pilgrims from across Eurasia mingled. And yet, when the dynasty weakened in its later centuries, the frontier became vulnerable once more. The wall, neglected, lay in ruin, unable to shield a dynasty that had chosen to look outward instead of inward. The Song dynasty, walls that could not hold. In 960 CE, the Cao Song dynasty rose to power, ushering in an age of remarkable innovation, gunpowder, printing, and advances in art and science. But the Song faced a problem that walls could not solve. They were militarily weaker than their northern neighbors. The Song relied on diplomacy, trade, and tribute to keep peace with powerful steppe states like the Khitan, Luan the Jerk, and Jin. When these rivals turned hostile, the Song tried to rebuild walls and fortifications, yet no barrier could compensate for their lack of cavalry strength. Eventually, the Song were driven south, their capital lost, their lands divided. The wall in this era symbolized fragility, a reminder that no structure, however vast, could protect a dynasty without military might to back it. The Mongol conquest, the wall defeated. Then came the storm from the steppe, the Alp Mongols. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan and his successors unleashed one of the most devastating military expansions in history. The wall, such as it was, offered little resistance. The Mongols simply bypassed it, or smashed through its weakened defenses. By 1279, the Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, ruled all of China. Under Mongol rule, the wall lost its purpose. There was centuries, we see a paradox take shape. The wall could be mighty when supported by a strong state, but useless when that state collapsed. The Tang had little need of it because they were strong. The Song relied on it because they were weak, and found it wanting. The Mongols swept it aside entirely, and yet despite neglect and defeat, the idea of the wall never vanished. It endured in memory, in fragments of earth stretching across the frontier, and in the cultural imagination of China. The wall was more than bricks and soil. It had become a symbol of order against chaos, of civilization against wilderness. Even when it lay in ruins, it waited for the day another dynasty would revive it. By the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire that had once conquered half the known world was crumbling. In China, the Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, collapsed under rebellion. Out of this upheaval rose a new dynasty, one determined to restore Chinese rule and protect it against any return of northern Mao. Domination, the Mingge. For the Ming, the wall was not merely a line of defense. It was the embodiment of their fears and ambitions, a monument of stone and brick that still stands today, recognizable to millions as the Great Wall of China. The Ming rise to power. The Ming dynasty was born in 1368, when rebel forces under Baekje Yuanzhang, later Emperor Hongwu, expelled the Mongols from Beijing and re-established Chinese rule. But though the Mongols had been driven north, they had not vanished. Bands of Mongol warriors still prowled the steppe, raiding into Chinese lands when opportunity arose. The Ming emperors, hardened by memories of Mongol rule, were determined that this would never happen again. Their answer lay in fortifications, not the earthen ramparts of the Qin or Han, but something stronger, something that could last for centuries, a wall of brick and stone. Unlike their predecessors, the Ming used a brick, stone, and mortar to rebuild and extend the wall. This made it far more durable, more imposing, and more resistant to erosion. The wall was not one uniform line, but a system of overlapping fortifications. It snaked across mountain ridges, plunged into valleys, and stretched into deserts. Watchtowers, signal stations, and fortresses dotted its length. Each section was carefully placed to take advantage of the terrain, blocking key passes and commanding sweeping views of the frontier. The Ming Wall was, in many ways, less a single wall and more a chain of strongholds, connected by ramparts, a defensive system designed for both surveillance and rapid communication. The engineering feat, building such a structure, was no small task. Workers cut stone from nearby mountains, baked bricks in kilns along the frontier, and hauled materials up treacherous slopes. The wall often followed the highest ridges, where construction was most grueling. Yet these heights gave defenders the advantage of sight and position. In some places, the wall reached 6 or 7 meters in height, with parapets for archers and wide walkways along the top where soldiers could patrol. The watchtowers, spaced at intervals, allowed fires by night and smoke by day to carry warnings across great distances. It was a marvel of both military engineering and human endurance. Life along the Ming Wall. But a wall is not simply stone, it is people. Along the Ming frontier lived not only soldiers, but their families, farmers, traders, and officials. The wall became a kind of living boundary, lined with garrisons and settlements. Soldiers stationed on the wall endured harsh conditions. Winters in the mountains were bitter, and supplies were often short. Many supplemented their rations by farming nearby land. Families grew up in the shadow of the wall, living lives both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in their daily struggles, extraordinary in their proximity to one of the greatest defenses ever built. For the people of the frontier, the wall was not a distant monument but part of daily life, a workplace, a home, and a symbol of survival. Famous sections. Several sections of the Ming Wall have become famous today. Badaling, north of Beijing, is perhaps the most visited, a fortress guarding the approach to the capital. Restored in the modern era, its imposing towers and stone walls represent the classic image of the Great Wall. Mutianyu, also near Beijing, is celebrated for its scenic setting amid forested hills. Jiayu Pass, and far to the west, was the fortress gate that marked the end of the Ming Wall, where China met the deserts of Central Asia. Each of these sites tells a story of defense, of vigilance, and of the Ming dynasty's determination to hold the frontier, strength and anxiety. The Ming Wall was vast, but it was also a reflection of deep anxiety. Unlike the Tang, who projected power beyond the frontier, the Ming often saw themselves as holding the line. The wall was not only a defense, it was a psychological reassurance, a promise that the steppe horsemen could not easily return. And yet, history would show that walls alone could not guarantee security. For while the wall slowed raids and gave defenders an advantage, it could not prevent betrayal from within or defeat in battle. The legacy of the Ming Wall. Still, the Ming achievement was lasting. Much of what tourists and historians admire today is Ming construction. Their walls, towers, and fortresses, built of durable materials, have endured the centuries. When people imagine the Great Wall, they are almost always picturing the Ming Wall. It was the culmination of 1,000 years of effort, the transformation of scattered earthworks into a monumental system of stone and brick. The Ming Dynasty had left behind a wall of stone and brick, mighty fortresses stretching across mountains and deserts, a frontier meant to protect the heart of China from the steppe. It wound like a dragon across the ridges, bristling with towers, echoing with the footsteps of garrisons, and glowing red at dusk as the sun sank behind its battlements. For 2 centuries, the wall embodied the Ming Empire's greatest hope, that strength in stone could defend against chaos. But history turned again. By the mid-17th century, the Ming Dynasty was collapsing. Rebellion, corruption, and foreign pressure tore at its foundations. Imperial coffers ran dry. Peasant revolts spread across the countryside. Generals quarreled, eunuchs schemed, and the once mighty capital at Beijing trembled. Into this chaos rode a new power, the Manchu, a people from beyond the wall, who would conquer Beijing and establish the Qing dynasty. With the coming of the Qing, the wall's story entered a new phase, one not of triumph, but of neglect, decay, and eventually reinvention. No longer a bulwark of defense, but a symbol of memory, the Qing conquest. The fall of the Ming was as dramatic as it was swift. 1644, rebel armies led by Li Zicheng stormed into Beijing. The last Ming emperor, Chongzhen, climbed Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City and, in despair, hanged himself beneath a tree. The dynasty had ended not with glory, but with ruin. But the rebels would not rule for long. To the northeast, the Manchus were waiting. At the strategic Senshanhaiguan Pass, where the wall meets the sea, the Ming general Wu Sangui faced a fateful choice. Caught between the rebel forces inside and the Manchu armies outside, he chose to open the gates to the Manchus. With that single act of betrayal or survival, depending on one's view, the wall failed in its most sacred purpose. The Manchu cavalry swept through the pass, descended on Beijing, and established the Qing dynasty, which would rule China for nearly 3 centuries. For the Qing, the wall was no longer a defense against outsiders. They had crossed it, taken the throne, and now sat within the empire it once sought to guard. Why the wall lost its purpose? The Ming had built the wall out of necessity. They faced constant raids from Mongol horsemen, who could sweep down from the steppe at will. Stone fortresses, watchtowers, and garrisons were their answer, a barrier meant to hold the nomads at bay. The Qing, however, took a different path. They were themselves frontier people, heirs to the traditions of the steppe. Rather than hiding behind walls, they expanded outward. Their armies rode deep into Mongolia, defeating the Dzungars. They extended imperial power into Tibet and Central Asia. The very lands that had once produced enemies were now under Qing control. In this vast new frontier, the wall no longer marked the edge of empire. It became, in effect, an obsolete relic. Garrison troops dwindled. Watchtowers fell silent. Patrols ceased. The structure that had once defined the line between civilized China and the outside world now stood forgotten, bypassed by the march of empire, local use and slow decay. As imperial interest faded, the wall began to enter local life in unexpected ways. In many villages, farmers dismantled its bricks and stones to build their own homes, barns and animal pens. What had once been the pride of emperors now served as roofing tiles or paving stones. In other places, earthen sections eroded under the wind and the rains of the northern plains. Without constant repair, cracks grew wider, ramparts softened, and battlements tumbled. Fortresses that once housed thousands of soldiers became empty shells, haunted only by the sound of the wind. Travelers in the Qing period recorded scenes of desolation. Towers half collapsed, battlements overgrown with grass, gates crumbling into ruin. For some, it was a melancholy sight, this ghost of a bygone age, stretching silent across the hills. The wall as a symbol of weakness. Ironically, during the height of Qing power in the 17th and 18th centuries, the wall's neglect became a kind of statement. The emperors from Kangxi to Qianlong were confident enough to ignore it. To maintain the wall was to admit vulnerability. To abandon it was to proclaim strength. But by the 19th century, the meaning shifted again. As the dynasty weakened, the wall came to symbolize failure, not because it fell in battle, but because it revealed the futility of China's defenses in a new age. Western powers did not come on horseback across the steppe. They arrived by sea in gunboats with cannons that could reduce fortresses to rubble. Against these weapons, the wall was meaningless. It stood silent as China suffered defeat in the Opium Wars, ceded territory, and faced humiliation at the hands of foreign empires. Once a proud defense, it now seemed like a monument to outdated thinking. Foreign visitors and rediscovery. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the wall found new admirers, not among the Chinese, but among Europeans. Jesuit missionaries in the Qing court described it in glowing detail to readers back home. Merchants and explorers marveled at its sheer scale, often exaggerating. It is a single unbroken line stretching thousands of miles across the continent. To foreigners, the wall became both a wonder and a metaphor. It was praised as one of the greatest works of human engineering, rivaling the pyramids or the Roman roads. At the same time, it was mocked as a symbol of isolation, proof, they claimed, that China had chosen to wall itself off from the wider world instead of embracing progress. The Qing emperors themselves remained largely indifferent. They saw no glory in repairing the ruins of the Ming. For them, the wall was a relic of the past, neither useful nor worthy of investment. Its destiny was to crumble, at least until a later age rediscovered it. From ruin to legend, as the Qing dynasty staggered toward collapse in the early 20th century, the wall lay in ruins, yet its image lingered. Poets wrote of its melancholy beauty, stretching like a broken ribbon across the hills. Foreign photographs captured lonely towers silhouetted against the sky. What had once been a military barrier was now becoming something else entirely, a symbol, not of strength or weakness, but of endurance. The wall had outlasted dynasties. It had seen emperors rise and fall, nomads sweep in and vanish, kingdoms built and undone. Though the Qing had neglected it, the wall remained patient and silent, waiting for another age to rediscover its meaning. In the time of the Qing dynasty, the Great Wall of China ceased to be a weapon of war and became, instead, a relic of memory. It was dismantled by villagers, ignored by emperors, marveled at by foreigners, and slowly reclaimed by the earth. Yet in neglect, it gained a new power. The wall no longer guarded the frontier, but it began to guard something else, the imagination. It stood not as a defense against enemies, but as a reminder of the passing of time, the vanity of human effort, and the endurance of stone long after dynasties have fallen. The Qing may have dismissed it, but in the centuries that followed, the wall would rise again, not as a fortress, but as a symbol of China itself. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Great Wall of China was no longer a living frontier. Its towers were crumbling, its ramparts overgrown, and its once vigilant garrisons long abandoned. Yet, in its very decay, the wall began to take on a new life, not as a military barrier, but as a monument of imagination. Foreign travelers, Chinese reformers, and later nationalists all looked upon the wall and saw something more than stone. They saw a symbol, and in this transformation the wall was reborn. Western encounters. The first detailed accounts of the wall to reach Europe came from Jesuit missionaries in the 17th and 18th centuries. And like Matteo Ricci described the wall with a mix of awe and exaggeration. To their readers in Europe, the wall became a wonder of the world, a marvel of engineering that seemed almost mythical. As trade and travel expanded in the 19th century, more Westerners encountered the wall. Some praised it as evidence of China's ancient grandeur. Others mocked it as a symbol of isolation, a nation that, instead of reaching out, had shut itself off behind barriers. Both views were simplifications, but they revealed the power of the wall to stir the imagination. Even in ruin, it commanded respect. Myths and legends. It was in this period that many of the myths we still hear today took shape. That the Great Wall is a single continuous structure. In truth, it is a patchwork of walls built by different dynasties, often overlapping, sometimes disconnected, and that it stretches 10,000 li without break. The phrase Wan Li Changcheng, the 10,000 li long wall, was always symbolic, not literal. That it can be seen from the moon or from space. In reality, the wall is narrow and blends with the landscape. It cannot be seen unaided from orbit. These myths endure not because they are true, but because they magnify the wall's aura. People want it to be the biggest, the longest, the most visible, a monument that transcends the ordinary. The wall is national symbol. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, China suffered under foreign invasions and internal weakness. The wall began to take on a new role, that of a national symbol. Writers, reformers, and later revolutionaries pointed to the wall as a reminder of endurance. It became a paradoxical image. On one hand, a relic of past weakness, a failed attempt to keep enemies out. On the other, a reminder of China's ability to build, to resist, and to last. When the Republic of China was founded in 1912, the wall became part of the national imagination. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, the wall itself became a battlefield in places like Badaling, where the struggle for China's survival seemed to echo its ancient defenses. Communist China and the wall. After 1949, when the People's Republic of China was established, the wall was at first seen as a relic of feudalism. Mao Zedong's China was more concerned with revolution than monuments of the past. Yet even Mao could not resist its symbolism. He famously declared, He who has not climbed the Great Wall is not a true man. From then on, the wall became not just a tourist site, but a patriotic pilgrimage. To climb the wall was to connect with China's long history, to prove one's strength and resolve, restoration and preservation. In the latter half of the 20th century, parts of the wall were restored, especially those near Beijing. Like Badaling, these became showcases for visitors, both Chinese and foreign. Yet beyond these restored sections, much of the wall remained in ruins. Even today, large portions crumble in remote mountains or are reclaimed by desert sands. Preservation has become a constant struggle between history and modern life, between tourism and decay. Today, the Great Wall of China winds across mountains, deserts and plains, not as one continuous rampart, but as a patchwork of ruins, restored segments and hidden remnants. More than 20,000 kilometers of wall, built by many dynasties, survive in some form. Some parts stand tall, carefully rebuilt for visitors, their stones clean and solid. Others crumble silently in remote valleys, their outlines fading into the earth like scars of time. Wherever it lies, the wall has become something new. It is no longer a fortress, no longer a frontier. It is a memory, a living reminder of centuries of struggle, ambition, and endurance. A world heritage. In 1987, the Great Wall was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This honor placed it not only in China's history, but in the heritage of all humanity. It became a monument not just to emperors and dynasties, but to human effort itself. Since then, millions of travelers from around the world have climbed its stairways and rested in the shade of its towers. To walk the wall today is to walk through time itself. You can feel the stones laid by Ming soldiers, see the fragile earth of Han-era defenses, and imagine the sweat of Qin's laborers who built its earliest foundations. Every step carries the weight of memory, the dreams of those who built it, and the silence of those who died along it. Preservation and challenge. Yet for all its grandeur, the wall is fragile. Seasons wear it down. Rain and frost loosen its stones. Winds sweep across its ramparts. Trees push their roots deep into the cracks. Human hands add to this burden. In villages near neglected stretches, bricks are still taken from the wall, reused for homes or roads, just as they were centuries ago. Modern highways and farmland carve through its path. Conservationists and Chinese authorities work tirelessly to protect it. But the scale of the wall makes preservation daunting. Thousands of kilometers lie scattered across harsh landscapes. Some sections are restored and secure, while others remain unguarded, slowly collapsing into dust. Debate surrounds the wall's future. Should it be rebuilt for tourists, polished and strong, even if it risks becoming a stage set? Or should it be left untouched, a ruin returning to the earth? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. The wall is both monument and ruin, both relic and living memory. To preserve it is to honor not only what remains, but also what has already been lost. Tourism and national pride. For China today, the Great Wall has become more than a relic of history. It is a symbol of national pride, woven into the story of the modern nation. Yet there are other places, quiet, remote, untouched. In those lonely stretches far from tourists, the wall whispers its true power. A broken tower on a misty ridge, a winding line of stone lost in grass. To stand there is to feel the ambition of those who built it, and the vastness of time that has passed since. A global icon, the Great Wall today is not only China's treasure, it has become a symbol for the world, one of the great icons of human civilization, like the pyramids of Egypt or the Roman Colosseum. It represents the will to build, the will to endure, and the will to leave behind a mark greater than oneself. And yet the wall also reminds us of the limits of human power. For all its size, it never stopped every invasion. For all its strength, it never saved dynasties from collapse. It was crossed, bypassed, ignored. But even in failure, it endured. The wall teaches us something deeper than military defense, shows us that monuments preserve memory. They tell stories of fear and ambition, of glory and decline, of people determined to be remembered. And long after emperors and armies are gone, the wall still stands, fragile in its stones, eternal in its symbolism. The story it tells, the Great Wall, is not only stone and earth, it is a story carved into the land itself. A story of peasants who carried bricks on their backs, of generals who lit watchfires against the night, of dynasties that built and abandoned, repaired and neglected. It is a story of survival, not perfect, not unbroken, but enduring. Each ruin, each rebuilt tower, each faint ridge of earth tells of human hands, human hopes and human time. The wall is both fragile and eternal, fragile in its crumbling battlements, eternal in the way it continues to inspire awe across centuries and continents. As we look at the wall today, we see not just a monument of China, but a monument of humanity. It reminds us of how far people will go to defend what they value, to endure against time and enemies, and above all, to be remembered. The Great Wall stretches across mountains and deserts, like a scar of history, but also like a bridge, connecting past and present. It speaks of ambition and loss, of unity and division, of a people's struggle to leave something behind. And as long as it remains home in proud restoration or quiet ruin, the wall will continue to stand as one of the greatest mirrors of our shared human story. The Great Wall of China has stood for more than 2,000 years. It has witnessed emperors rise and fall, dynasties crumble and nations transform. It has felt the footsteps of soldiers, the labor of peasants, the silence of abandonment, and the awe of travelers. Once it was a weapon, once it was a frontier. Today it is something far greater. It is memory. When we look at the wall now, we see not only its stones and towers, but the centuries carried within them. Each brick once laid by hand, each tower once filled with fire and signal, now tells us not only of power, but of endurance. It reminds us that human achievements, no matter how mighty, are always fragile. Walls crumble, kingdoms fall, but memory endures. The Great Wall is a paradox. For all its size, it could not stop every invasion. For all its strength, it could not save every dynasty. Yet in its very imperfection, it speaks to something eternal. It speaks of the human will to create, to endure, and to leave a mark on the earth. Not a mark that defeats time, but one that lives within it. When you stand upon the wall, whether at the crowded steps of battling, or on a quiet ridge far away from the tourists, you feel that paradox. The stones are solid beneath your feet, yet the centuries are fragile in the air around you. You see mountains rolling endlessly into the distance, and you sense both the greatness and the smallness of humanity. You feel the ambition of those who built the wall, and the humility of those who now walk upon its remains. The wall today belongs not only to China, but to the world. It has become a symbol, like the pyramids or the Colosseum, of what humanity has dreamed and dared. It reminds us of what walls can and cannot do, of how fear builds barriers, but how memory turns them into bridges. As this story comes to an end, we are left with one lasting truth. The Great Wall endures because it is more than stone. It is a story carved into the land itself, a story of strength and weakness, of pride and humility, of fragility and eternity. And as long as people remember it, walk it, and wonder at it, the wall will never truly fall. So tonight, as we leave the wall behind, let its memory linger. Let it remind us that all human effort, whether building, dreaming, or simply remembering, is part of a greater story. The wall endures, and in its endurance, it teaches us that we too are part of something larger than time.